I died, then woke up as my professor's husband. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our new videos. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support our channel as we continue bringing you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this one. Your support truly means more than you know. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. We always enjoy seeing how far these stories reach and learning where everyone is joining us from today. Now let us begin today's story. The greatest mysteries do not begin when someone dies. They begin when someone wakes up in a life that was never supposed to belong to them. Julian Carter had always believed that life ended with one final breath. There was no reason to expect a second chance. No reason to imagine another tomorrow waiting beyond the darkness. One ordinary evening, after leaving a neighborhood bookstore where he had volunteered every weekend for nearly 3 years, he stood at a crosswalk beneath the soft glow of streetlights, smiling as he reread a message from a close friend about meeting for coffee the following morning. It was supposed to be another normal day. It was supposed to be another ordinary plan. Then everything disappeared. There was no pain he could remember, no endless tunnel of light, and no mysterious voice calling his name. There was only silence so complete that even his own thoughts seemed to fade away. When awareness slowly returned, the first thing Julian noticed was the scent of fresh linen and cedar wood. The second was the warmth of sunlight spilling across an unfamiliar bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a quiet university campus. His heart began racing as he sat upright, staring at surroundings that felt elegant, expensive, and completely foreign. A tailored gray suit rested neatly on a chair. Books filled every shelf from floor to ceiling. Framed academic awards decorated one wall beside photographs of graduation ceremonies and faculty gatherings. None of it belonged to him. Julian reached for his head, expecting confusion to disappear after a few seconds, but instead he found a smooth silver wedding band resting on his left hand. He froze. He had never been married. His breathing became uneven as he looked around the room again, hoping to find an explanation hidden somewhere among the unfamiliar furniture. A polished wooden dresser stood near the bed. On top of it rested a leather wallet, a university identification card, and a framed wedding photograph turned slightly toward the window. Almost afraid to touch it, Julian picked up the frame with trembling hands. His own face smiled back at him. Standing beside him was an exceptionally handsome man with calm blue eyes, dark hair, broad shoulders, and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being admired without asking for attention. Both of them wore wedding rings. Julian almost dropped the photograph. His pulse echoed inside his ears as he searched the room for anything that could explain what he was seeing. He grabbed the identification card next. The photograph showed his face, but the information beneath it made even less sense. It listed him as the spouse of Professor Adrien Whitmore, Department of Advanced Behavioral Studies, Whitmore University. Julian whispered the name several times, hoping it would awaken a forgotten memory. Nothing happened. He had never heard of Adrien Whitmore. He had certainly never married a university professor. Before panic could completely overwhelm him, he noticed a leather folder lying beside the wallet. Inside were official documents stamped with university seals. One page was unmistakable. It was a marriage certificate. His own signature appeared beside another elegant signature belonging to Adrien Whitmore. The date showed they had been married for almost 2 years. Julian's thoughts spiraled faster with every passing second. If he had truly died, then whose life was he living now? If this marriage was real, why did he remember absolutely nothing? And if everyone around him believed this life belonged to him, how long could he pretend before someone discovered the truth? Just as those questions filled his mind, footsteps approached outside the bedroom. They were slow, steady, and confident. The door quietly opened. A tall alpha with an unmistakable presence stepped inside wearing a crisp white dress shirt beneath a charcoal blazer. Every movement calm, disciplined, and effortlessly commanding. His sharp eyes softened the instant they met Julian's frightened gaze. Without surprise or hesitation, the professor offered a gentle smile that somehow carried both relief and quiet exhaustion. "You are finally awake," Adrien Whitmore said softly. as though he had been waiting far longer than Julian could possibly understand. Julian stared at Adrien Whitmore, convinced that if he looked long enough, some forgotten memory would return and explain why the calm alpha standing in front of him seemed to know him so well. Nothing happened. The silence stretched between them until Adrien slowly set a ceramic mug on the bedside table. "You do not have to force yourself to remember anything today," he said gently. "The doctor warned me that waking up might be confusing." Julian searched the professor's face for any sign of deception, but all he found was quiet concern. "Who are you?" he finally whispered. The question lingered in the room like a sudden winter breeze. Adrien's expression did not harden. If anything, it softened even more. "I am Adrien Whitmore," he answered calmly. "I am your husband." Julian lowered his eyes toward the silver ring on his finger before looking back at the man in front of him. "I do not remember marrying anyone." Adrien accepted those words without surprise. "I know. I do not remember this apartment. I know. I do not even remember meeting you." Adrien remained silent for several seconds before pulling a chair beside the bed and sitting at a respectful distance. "Then we will begin there." Julian frowned with confusion. "You are not angry?" Adrien offered a faint smile. "Would being angry help you remember?" Julian could not answer. The Alpha's patience felt almost impossible. If their positions had been reversed, Julian doubted he could have remained so calm. Adrien reached into his jacket and carefully removed a worn leather wallet. From inside, he unfolded a small photograph. It showed both of them sitting beneath a large oak tree on the university campus. Julian laughed openly in the picture while Adrien looked at him with unmistakable affection. "You carried this with you every day," Adrien explained. "You insisted that whenever work became stressful, I should look at this photograph and remember why I always came home smiling." Julian studied the image for a long moment. The smile belonged to him. The happiness looked genuine, yet it felt like he was looking at someone else's life. "I wish I could remember this," he admitted quietly. Adrien nodded. "So do I." Another silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. Finally, Julian gathered enough courage to ask the question that frightened him most. "What happened to me?" Adrien folded his hands together before answering. 3 months ago, you were involved in a serious traffic accident while driving back from a volunteer literacy event near the university. Your body recovered faster than anyone expected, but you never regained consciousness until this morning." Julian's heart skipped a beat. Volunteer literacy event. The words stirred something faintly familiar, like hearing the echo of a song he could almost recognize. "Books," Julian whispered without thinking. "Children." Adrien's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, you loved working with children." Julian pressed his fingers against his temples, hoping the fragile memory would become clearer, but it disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Frustration filled his chest. "I cannot remember anything else." Adrien slowly stood. "Then do not chase memories that are not ready to return." He walked toward the window overlooking the campus. Students crossed the sidewalks carrying backpacks while professors greeted one another outside the historic brick buildings. "You once told me something I have never forgotten," Adrien said quietly. "You believed memories make us who we were, but our choices make us who we become." Julian looked at the Alpha with growing curiosity. "Did I really say that?" Adrien smiled. "You did." Before Julian could ask another question, his phone vibrated on the nearby desk. Adrien glanced at the screen, and his calm expression changed almost imperceptibly. "The university board has scheduled an emergency faculty reception this afternoon," he explained. "They have all been waiting for you to wake up." Julian blinked in disbelief. "Me?" Adrien nodded. "Everyone believes Professor Whitmore's husband is finally coming back to campus today." Julian had imagined universities as quiet places filled with libraries and lecture halls, but Whitmore University felt more like a city built around knowledge itself. Historic brick buildings stretched across rolling green lawns while students hurried between classes carrying books, research papers, and steaming cups of coffee. Adrien drove through the front gates with calm confidence, offering a friendly wave to the campus security officers who immediately greeted him with genuine respect. Julian noticed how everyone seemed to recognize the Alpha. Professors smiled as they passed. Graduate students stepped aside without being asked. Even visiting guests lowered their voices when Adrien walked by, not out of fear but admiration. It was the kind of authority earned through years of integrity rather than titles alone. "You are very popular," Julian observed quietly. Adrien smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "People are simply kind." Julian almost laughed. "That is not what I see." Adrien parked beside the oldest academic building on campus, where banners welcomed faculty members to the annual Academic Excellence reception. Before they stepped out of the car, Adrien turned toward Julian. "There is something I want you to remember before we go inside." Julian listened carefully. "You do not owe anyone an explanation today. If someone asks about your memory, simply tell the truth. There is no shame in healing." Julian nodded gratefully. As they entered the grand hall, conversations gradually softened. Faculty members who had spent months hearing updates about Julian's recovery immediately walked over with warm smiles and heartfelt congratulations. Several embraced him gently. Others simply shook his hand and welcomed him back. Julian wished he could remember every face, yet he felt strangely comforted by their kindness. Then the room became noticeably quieter. Students standing near the entrance suddenly straightened their posture. A group of alpha undergraduates instinctively stepped aside as Adrien entered the central hall beside Julian. One after another, professors greeted Adrien with unmistakable respect. The dean himself crossed the room to welcome him personally. "Professor Whitmore," the dean said warmly, "it is wonderful to see both of you together again." Adrien thanked him with his usual humility before introducing Julian, carefully allowing him to participate at his own pace. Julian watched the interactions with growing amazement. Adrien never spoke over anyone. He listened carefully before answering every question, remembered students by name, and congratulated young researchers on recent achievements without needing reminders. The alpha, who seemed almost intimidating at first glance, carried himself with remarkable patience and generosity. It became increasingly difficult for Julian to imagine why someone so respected would choose him as a life partner. During the reception, a large screen displayed photographs celebrating memorable moments from the university's history. Suddenly, a familiar image appeared. It showed Adrien delivering a lecture to hundreds of students while Julian sat quietly in the front row, smiling proudly as though he had witnessed that scene countless times before. More photographs followed. Adrien and Julian planting trees during a campus charity event. Adrien presenting Julian with a volunteer appreciation award. Adrien laughing openly while Julian adjusted the crooked tie around his collar before an academic gala. Every photograph reflected the same quiet happiness. Julian felt an unexpected ache in his chest. Even without memories, he could see genuine affection in the way they looked at one another. "You love taking candid pictures," Adrien said softly as they watched the slideshow together. "You believe the happiest moments were the ones people never planned." Julian continued staring at the screen until one final photograph appeared. It showed both of them, standing in front of the university library beneath the words "Welcome Home, Professor Whitmore's family." As Julian looked closer, something caught his attention. Someone standing in the background had been watching them with an expression that was neither friendly nor welcoming, and for reasons he could not explain, the stranger's face awakened the first true feeling of fear since he had opened his eyes in this unfamiliar life. Julian could not take his eyes off the final photograph even after the slideshow moved on to the next image. The unknown man's face remained fixed in his thoughts with unsettling clarity. Unlike everyone else in the background who had been smiling or applauding, the stranger had been watching only Adrien and Julian with a cold, unreadable expression. It was not anger that Julian sensed. It was calculation. Before he could study the photograph any longer, the screen changed to another celebration from years earlier. "Is everything all right?" Adrien asked quietly after noticing Julian's sudden silence. Julian hesitated before answering. "Who was the man standing behind us in that picture?" Adrien looked toward the screen, but the image had already disappeared. "Which man?" Julian described him as carefully as possible, mentioning the dark suit, silver tie, and distinctive scar near one eyebrow. Adrien's calm expression changed almost imperceptibly. "I do not remember anyone matching that description attending the event," he admitted. "Perhaps he was a guest." Julian nodded, yet something deep inside him refused to accept that explanation. The uneasy feeling stayed with him throughout the reception. Hours later, after returning to the apartment overlooking the campus, Adrien excused himself to answer several work calls before tomorrow's lectures. Left alone in the quiet living room, Julian wandered through the bookshelves, hoping familiar surroundings might awaken another memory. Academic journals, literature, psychology, and educational philosophy filled every shelf with remarkable precision. Everything reflected Adrien's disciplined nature. Then Julian noticed one cabinet that looked different from the others. Hidden behind several large textbooks rested a slim wooden box. It was unlocked. Inside lay a small leather notebook tied with a blue ribbon. The cover carried only 2 handwritten words. For tomorrow. Julian carefully untied the ribbon and opened the first page. The handwriting belonged to him. If you are reading this, then something unexpected has happened. You always joke that I wrote too many journals because I was afraid of forgetting ordinary days. Maybe that habit will save us both one day. Julian's heart pounded as he turned the page. Every entry described simple moments shared with Adrien. One page recalled a rainy afternoon when they spent 3 hours organizing children's books for a literacy fundraiser before celebrating with inexpensive takeout in the university courtyard. Another described watching Adrien patiently tutor a struggling student long after office hours had ended. Today I fell in love with him a little more, one entry read. Not because he is the most respected alpha on campus, but because he never reminds anyone that he is. Julian continued reading through pages filled with gratitude, laughter, and quiet admiration. There were no dramatic declarations, no impossible romance, only hundreds of ordinary moments that slowly built an extraordinary marriage. Tears gathered in Julian's eyes as he reached the final completed entry. If I ever lose my memories, I hope I remember one thing before anything else. Adrien never asked me to become someone different. He simply made me believe I was already enough. Julian closed the notebook against his chest, overwhelmed by emotions that belonged to a life he could not remember. At that exact moment, the apartment door opened. Adrien stepped inside, carrying several folders from his office before noticing the journal in Julian's hands. He stopped immediately, surprise crossing his face for the first time since Julian had awakened. After a long silence, Adrien spoke in an almost whisper. You found the notebook. Julian slowly nodded. Why did I hide it? Adrien looked at the blue ribbon for several quiet seconds before answering. Because the night before your accident, you told me that if anything ever happened to you, those pages would help me remember the person you hoped never to stop becoming. Adrien remained standing near the doorway, while Julian carefully placed the notebook back inside its wooden box. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The quiet apartment seemed filled with memories that only one of them could still remember. Finally, Julian looked up. Did I really write all of that? Adrien nodded slowly. Every word. Julian lowered his eyes again. It feels strange to read about someone who sounds exactly like me, but also feels like a complete stranger. Adrien walked closer, but stopped several feet away, respecting the distance Julian still needed. You once told me that people change throughout their lives. Losing your memories does not change your kindness, your curiosity, or the way you care about others. Those things are still here. Julian wanted to believe him. The notebook had described a marriage built through countless ordinary moments rather than dramatic promises, and somehow that made the missing memories even more painful. If such happiness had truly existed, why could he not remember even a single afternoon they had shared together? Hoping to calm his thoughts, Julian asked Adrien if there was anywhere on campus that had been especially meaningful to them. Adrien smiled gently. There is one place. The following morning they walked across the quiet university grounds before most students arrived for class. Morning sunlight filtered through rows of maple trees as they followed a winding path toward the oldest section of campus. Eventually, Adrien stopped beside a peaceful garden surrounding a small stone gazebo overlooking a reflective pond. This was your favorite place, Adrien explained. Whenever I became overwhelmed with research or administrative work, you insisted we eat lunch here instead of staying inside my office. Julian sat on one of the wooden benches and listened to birds singing among the branches overhead. The place carried an unexpected sense of comfort, almost as though part of him recognized it before his mind could understand why. As he looked across the pond, another faint image flashed through his thoughts. Someone laughing, a picnic basket, pages of a book turning in the wind. The memory disappeared almost immediately, leaving only the feeling behind. Something almost came back, Julian whispered. Adrien did not ask what he had seen. He simply sat beside him in silence, allowing Julian to experience the moment without pressure. That patience touched Julian more deeply than he expected. Later that afternoon, Adrien returned to his office for faculty meetings, while Julian remained in the apartment. Curious about the accident, he searched through neatly organized folders containing insurance documents, medical reports, and correspondence from the hospital. Most of the information confirmed what Adrien had already explained. Then one document caught his attention. It summarized the traffic investigation and included a sentence highlighted in yellow. The report stated that investigators had been unable to determine why another vehicle had suddenly entered Julian's lane moments before the collision. The driver of that vehicle had disappeared before authorities could identify him. Julian's heartbeat quickened. He immediately remembered the unfamiliar man from the university photograph. The same uneasiness returned. Was it only coincidence, or had the stranger somehow been connected to the accident? Before Julian could examine the report further, another envelope slipped from the folder onto the floor. It contained a security photograph taken outside the university entrance on the evening before the accident. Standing across the street, partially hidden beneath a baseball cap, was the very same man Julian had noticed in the slideshow, watching him and Adrien from a distance with the same cold expression that now felt impossible to ignore. Julian stared at the security photograph long after the apartment had grown quiet. The stranger's face matched the figure from the university slideshow with unsettling precision. It was no longer a vague feeling or an uncertain impression. Someone had been watching him before the accident, and that same person had appeared near the university on more than one occasion. Julian carefully returned every document to the folder before Adrien came home. He was not hiding the truth out of distrust. He simply wanted to understand what he had found before creating unnecessary fear. That evening, Adrien arrived carrying a stack of student papers waiting to be graded. Even after a full day of teaching, he greeted Julian with the same gentle smile that somehow made the unfamiliar apartment feel a little more like home. They shared a simple dinner together while Adrien described amusing moments from his classes. Students had argued passionately about research ethics. One freshman had accidentally addressed the dean as a librarian, and an entire lecture hall had applauded when a struggling student finally solved a difficult problem without assistance. Julian listened closely, realizing that Adrien never spoke about his own achievements. Every story focused on helping someone else succeed. After dinner, Julian quietly asked, "Why did you become a professor?" Adrien considered the question before answering. "Because knowledge changes lives only when someone is willing to share it with patience." Julian smiled faintly. "You always answer questions as though you have spent years thinking about them." Adrien laughed softly. "According to you, I usually have." The conversation lingered comfortably into the evening. Julian noticed that every time he became frustrated with his missing memories, Adrien gently guided the discussion toward the future instead of the past. He never pressured Julian to remember. He never reminded him of promises he could no longer recall. That quiet respect slowly replaced fear with trust. The next morning, Julian decided to visit the university library alone while Adrien taught his graduate seminar. The massive building felt strangely familiar despite his missing memories. Librarians greeted him warmly, and several students smiled as they passed, welcoming him back without hesitation. Near the history archives, an elderly librarian named Mrs. Harper recognized him immediately. "It is wonderful to see you walking these halls again," she said kindly. "Professor Whitmore never missed a single day of visiting you at the hospital. Even after teaching 3 classes, attending faculty meetings, and reviewing research papers, he still spent every evening reading your favorite novels beside your bed." Julian felt his chest tighten. "Every evening?" Mrs. Harper nodded. "For 3 months. Some nights the nurses told him to go home and rest, but he always answered the same way. He said that love is not measured by convenience." Julian thanked her quietly before wandering into the silent reading room. There, surrounded by shelves filled with countless stories, he finally understood something the missing memories could not erase. Whether he remembered Adrien or not, the Alpha had never stopped choosing him. That realization carried more weight than any forgotten photograph or journal entry. As Julian stepped outside the library into the afternoon sunlight, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Behind the windshield sat the same unfamiliar man from the photograph, watching the university entrance with patient, unwavering attention. This time, however, the stranger looked directly at Julian, offered a faint knowing smile, and slowly drove away before Julian could even memorize the license plate. Julian spent the entire evening thinking about the stranger in the black sedan, yet every time he looked across the living room, Adrien was quietly grading assignments with complete focus, occasionally smiling at thoughtful essays written by his students. The contrast between the mysterious figure outside the university and the calm alpha sitting only a few feet away made Julian realize how little he truly understood about the life he had inherited. The following morning, Adrien invited Julian to attend one of his lectures, explaining that students had been asking whether Julian was healthy enough to visit campus again. Julian hesitated at first, uncertain whether he belonged in a classroom filled with people who expected him to remember a past that no longer existed, but Adrien never pressured him. "Come only if you want to," he said. "There is never an obligation." Those simple words made the decision easier. When they entered the largest lecture hall on campus, more than 200 students were already waiting. Conversations gradually faded until complete silence settled across the room. Adrien greeted every student with the same warmth and respect before beginning the lecture. There were no dramatic speeches or displays of authority. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions, encouraged different opinions, and praised careful reasoning rather than perfect answers. Julian watched in quiet amazement as even the most nervous students gradually found the confidence to speak. Adrien never embarrassed anyone for making a mistake. He simply guided each discussion with patience until every student discovered the answer together. By the end of the lecture, the entire room rose in applause, not because it was expected, but because every student genuinely admired the professor standing before them. As the class slowly emptied, one graduate student approached Julian with a grateful smile. "You probably do not remember me," she admitted, "but you convinced Professor Whitmore to create the mentorship program that helped students like me stay in school. Without both of you, I would have dropped out 2 years ago." Before Julian could respond, several other students joined the conversation, each sharing stories of scholarships, research opportunities, and personal encouragement that Adrien and Julian had quietly provided over the years. None of them spoke about prestigious awards or famous publications. They spoke about kindness, second chances, and people who believed in them when they doubted themselves. Walking back across campus, Julian finally understood why Adrien was respected by everyone he met. It had nothing to do with being the strongest alpha. It came from making everyone around him stronger. That realization settled deeply in Julian's heart. Later that afternoon, Adrien received a call from the university board offering him the position of executive chancellor, the highest administrative role at Whitmore University. The promotion carried national recognition, extraordinary influence, and responsibilities that would place him among the most respected academic leaders in the country. Julian expected Adrien to accept immediately. Instead, Adrien thanked the board for their confidence and quietly declined. After ending the call, Julian stared at him in disbelief. "Most people would spend their entire careers hoping for that opportunity," he said. Adrien looked out the office window where students crossed the courtyard below. "Leadership is not about climbing higher," he answered. "It is about helping more people climb with you. If I leave the classroom, I lose the reason I chose this profession." Julian felt something shift inside him. It was not a recovered memory, but a new understanding born from his own heart. For the first time since awakening in this unfamiliar life, he realized he was no longer trying to remember why he had once loved Adrien. He was quietly beginning to discover his own reasons. At that very moment, a university security officer hurried toward Adrien's office carrying an envelope that had arrived without a return address. Inside was a single recent photograph of Julian leaving the library the previous afternoon, and written neatly across the back were 6 chilling words: "Some memories should never come back." Adrien quietly placed the anonymous photograph back inside the envelope without allowing the concern on his face to grow into panic. He had spent years teaching students that fear became more dangerous when it replaced clear thinking, and he refused to abandon that lesson now. Julian watched him carefully, expecting questions or accusations, but Adrien simply looked toward the university security officer and asked him to preserve the envelope exactly as it had arrived. Please ask campus security to review the entrance cameras from this morning, Adrien said calmly. Do not alarm the students. Handle everything as discreetly as possible. After the officer left, Julian broke the silence. You already knew someone might be watching us, did you not? Adrien hesitated before answering. I suspected the accident left unanswered questions, but I never wanted you to carry that burden while you were still recovering. Julian reached into his jacket and slowly removed the old security photograph he had discovered in the investigation folder. Then I should probably tell you that I have already seen him. Adrien studied the picture for only a moment, before his expression changed. This man attended one of our public research conferences almost a year ago, he said quietly. He introduced himself as an independent educational consultant, but something about him always felt unusual. Julian placed both photographs side by side on Adrien's desk. There was no doubt they showed the same individual. Before either of them could continue, Adrien's office phone rang. It was the head of campus security informing him that the visitor who delivered the envelope had worn a baseball cap, sunglasses, and had intentionally avoided every security camera except one. Even more surprising, the visitor had signed the guest log using the name Daniel Mercer, a name that did not exist anywhere in the university records. That evening, Adrien suggested they return home early. During the drive back across campus, neither of them spoke very much. Julian looked through the window at students laughing together beneath the old oak trees and wondered how many ordinary lives Adrien had quietly protected over the years without ever seeking recognition. When they arrived at the apartment, Julian returned to the wooden box containing his journal. Something inside urged him to read the unfinished pages once more. As he carefully turned through familiar entries describing volunteer programs, shared meals, and quiet evenings together, he noticed several pages stuck tightly together near the back. They had apparently absorbed moisture during the months the notebook remained hidden. Separating them with great care, Julian uncovered a final handwritten entry he had never seen before. Unlike the earlier pages, the handwriting appeared hurried, almost as though it had been written moments before leaving home. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you will not blame Adrien. He tried to stop me from investigating the university grant records because he wanted to keep me safe. But I found something that could hurt many innocent people if it remained hidden. If I forget everything one day, I hope my future self remembers this instead. Adrien has never lied to me. He only loves too quietly. Julian felt tears gather in his eyes. At that exact moment, a sharp memory flashed across his mind with stunning clarity. He saw himself standing inside the university archives holding a folder stamped confidential while the same mysterious man reached toward it from across the room. The vision vanished almost immediately, leaving only one unforgettable sentence echoing inside his thoughts. Do not let them erase the truth. Morning sunlight poured through the apartment windows as Julian stood quietly beside the dining table, reading the final journal entry again and again until every word settled deep within his heart. The fragments of memory that had returned were still incomplete, yet they revealed one undeniable truth. Adrien had never hidden the truth to protect himself. He had hidden it to protect Julian. When Adrien entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, Julian walked toward him without hesitation. I remember something, he said softly. Adrien remained completely still, allowing Julian to continue at his own pace. Not everything, only pieces. I remember searching through university grant records because I believed someone was manipulating educational funding that belonged to scholarship students. I remember you asking me to stop because you were worried about my safety. Adrien lowered his eyes before quietly answering. I hoped I was wrong. Julian smiled gently. You were trying to protect me. Adrien finally looked back at him. I would make the same choice again. Before either of them could speak further, campus security called with unexpected news. The anonymous visitor had been identified through city surveillance cameras. He was not connected to the university at all. He had been working with a private organization that had attempted to influence educational grants for personal financial gain several years earlier. Julian had unknowingly discovered inconsistencies while volunteering with literacy programs connected to those grants, and before the accident, he had already submitted copies of the documents to state investigators. The investigation had quietly continued while Julian remained unconscious. That very morning, authorities announced the case had officially concluded with full financial recovery for the affected scholarship programs. The mystery that had haunted Julian's missing memories was finally over. Later that afternoon, the university gathered students and faculty in the central courtyard to celebrate the opening of a new learning center funded entirely by the Restored Scholarship Program. The dean invited Adrien to speak, but Adrien gently declined and instead asked Julian to stand beside him. Looking across hundreds of students, Julian realized he still could not remember every chapter of the life he had lived before waking in the hospital. Yet he no longer felt afraid of that loss. He turned toward Adrien with quiet certainty. "There is something I remember perfectly now," he said. Adrien smiled with gentle curiosity. "What is that?" Julian reached for Adrien's hand, their wedding rings catching the afternoon sunlight. "I remember how you make people feel. Safe, respected, seen. I may have fallen in love with you before the accident, but today I am choosing you again because of the man standing in front of me, not because of memories that belong to yesterday." Emotion filled Adrien's calm blue eyes. He slowly reached into his jacket and removed the same handwritten letter he had once planned to give Julian months earlier. "I never needed you to remember our past," Adrien said quietly. "I only hoped one day you might choose a future with me again." Julian accepted the letter before wrapping both hands around it. "Then my answer is yes." Warm applause gradually spread across the courtyard as students realized what they had witnessed. It was not a grand public proposal or a dramatic declaration. It was simply two people choosing one another with complete honesty. Walking home together beneath rows of maple trees, Julian looked toward the familiar campus that had once belonged to a stranger's life. Now it finally felt like his own. He understood that memories could disappear, circumstances could change, and even a second chance could arrive in the most unexpected way. But kindness, trust, and love built through everyday choices possessed a strength that neither time nor tragedy could erase. And for the first time since opening his eyes in that unfamiliar bedroom, Julian no longer wondered why he had awakened in someone else's life, because he finally realized it had always been the life he was meant to choose for himself.